Hi, welcome to part 4 of the 4-part series on the 4 strategic themes of the Omni-win Project. The goal of the Omni-win Project is to accelerate the co-creation of the future of democracy, to create a world where people can have a voice in the issues that impact their lives, and to make sure that we are having deliberative, thoughtful decision making that includes all those voices so that we can build a future that's sustainable and works for everyone. So today's strategic theme is about personal growth. I'm calling this one the development of the omnipartial individual. Omnipartial is a term that comes from Kenneth Cloak, and it means to be biased in favor of everyone. I think that this is a really good way to think about this issue. When I say everyone, I mean not necessarily just everyone out there, but how do I make sure that I'm getting the outcomes that are the best for me, the best for you, the best for the community around us, the best for our systems, that honor our past generations and are creating the best outcomes for future generations. Omnipartial. And development, that's an interesting one. And there's an edge that when we talk about human or adult development, there's an edge of thinking this could be a hierarchical, like something is better or worse than the other. I want to just name that, first of all, development is real. We do get to grow and learn. It seems the developments seem to have consistent patterns. So there's different ways that we can grow and learn. And part of that is about growing into a larger sense of ourself and who we are. I am me, or I am my family, I am my community, I am my nation, I am humanity, I am Earth, I am the universe. This strategic theme is particularly challenging and interesting for various reasons. Just quickly, the first 3 were: how do we make collaborative communication? How do we use better tools for collaborative communication? That is super important. The other, how do we change our democratic systems? And how do we create a culture that wants an omni-win outcome? How do we create an omni-win culture and civilization? And this strategic theme is basically the one that helps us have the capacity to navigate all those things, to advocate for those things, to desire to be in diversity and change. That is an inherent part of being in a pluralistic democracy. It's complex. One, because there's a lot of different opinions about that. You can find self-help books, there's entire sections in your library or so forth. There's a lot of information out there. A lot of it has different things and different pieces of advice. It's also a very personal thing. The advice that works for me might not work for you, and we're all unique and we're all starting where we are. I think that's maybe the first lesson that I want to share. Is just it's important for each of us to take an assessment of where we are and where we want to go. And that's the main, piece here that just so important, because the advantage of being in a democracy where we get to sort of guide the decisions that are going to impact our lives is everyone's voice is actually really important. We can't be leaving anyone out. And so that capacity for each of us to sort of recognize, well, what's important to me? What do I care about? What is meaningful? Where are my values? And then to act and behave and create based on those things, that's an essential piece. It's individual change and is interesting also because each one of us, 300 and something plus million individuals in the United States, gets a lot of each individual change is just one small part. But it's also nice because it's pretty quick. Each of us can start making changes in our life right now. We can change the way we communicate with people around us right now. We can change the questions, the information, we can learn. And also to really grow as an individual, it takes some time in our own scale. But even if it's a year or 4 years to really make some important change in our life, That's pretty quick compared to the changes that we might be seeing on a systemic or a cultural level. There's something that's tricky about this, and it's also the reason why this is such an important theme, is that it's very easy to see problems and to externalize them and think that's something that's happening out there. And that tendency to want to blame others for the problems makes a lot of sense. And then, of course, if I don't want to blame others, then we might blame ourselves. And I think that I want to shift the question of whose fault is it, or who should we blame? Start thinking about responsibility. And this has been one that's been really key for me, that there's a choice for me to take responsibility for my role, and then to let that be something that I can be as a model for other folks, as opposed to just trying to impact change. There's something about taking on responsibility of things. One of my favorite quotes is that you can't be part of the solution if you're not part of the problem. And that's an important thing to realize, that if we want to see change in whatever it is, we have to be able to recognize ourselves and our own role in it, and how we play into it, and how we create the situation. If you're not part of the problem, then it's none of your business. It's someone else's issue. And so taking that personal responsibility is hard. And so this is why we need to grow as individuals. I'm going to talk a little bit about what are some of the problems, and I'm going to talk a bit about my experience with this. And then talk about how it fits into the rest of the Omni-win project, and kind of some of the things that are going forward. I guess just a reminder here that these 4 videos are an introduction to all the amazing content that I'm going to be excited to be sharing with you all going forward. Let's talk about why some of the challenges come up here. First of all, there's a very, very confusing question that is at the heart of all conflict, which is the tension between self and other. How do I get my needs met? And how do I make sure that you get your needs met, or that everyone else gets their needs met? And oftentimes there actually is a choice there. And if we get good at it, and it's problematic if we try to just only care for our own self. But it's also problematic for only giving other people what they need. That's totally not sustainable. And so we have to find the rhythm of oscillation, the left, right, the in, out, the you, me pace. And that takes some skill. So that's one of the pieces. Another one of the challenges that is coming up is that we're really having a hard time with accepting change, difference, and diversity. It's threatening to see people that are different than us, and to think differently or have different opinions. It's also really hard to realize that, oh shoot, we've been doing something wrong, we need to change. And there's that. And so a lot of this has to do with acceptance. And this is actually what I call the core problem. We don't seem to have a lot of ability to give people a chance to actually change. Because if we are afraid of change, or we can't accept differences, and we get to the place where we start seeing that as right and wrong, or good guys and bad guys, what we're actually doing is preventing change from happening. And I think there's a part that's really interesting here, is that we don't necessarily need to accept that this is easy. It's not. It actually goes very much against our nature. It's very important for us to protect our identity, to protect our people, to protect our tribe. That's actually really interesting. And all of this tension between self and other, and that fear of change and diversity and difference, can lead to a lot of cognitive distortion and manipulation. And of course, we know so much about how our social media is totally excited to manipulate some of these like base core things. So let me tell you about how I've come to approach some of this. First of all, again, like this realizing that there's always going to be a dynamic balance between self and other, or as Paul Tillich, the theologian, called it, power and love. Every human being, every living creature has a desire to express itself with ever greater intensity and extensity, more of me, more places. And we also have love. And that's the drive of every living thing, to reconnect with the separated. we come from one and then become separate, and we all want to come back together. And that means we have to create this tension between freedom and limits and so forth. And learning about this has been really helpful for me. And there's a little trick that I can share here, that if I'm in a tension between self and other, let's say me and my partner, and I see me as one person and her as another person, and then we come, but then I can also then expand my understanding to see that we're our own unit. And as a unit, then we might have another sense of other. And so every time that we see ourselves in relationship and we're thinking about it as a self and other, Republicans and Democrats, those guys and these guys, us and them, that tension, every time we're doing that, we can realize, oh, we're in relationship with that group or that other person, and can see that, oh, what happens when I see that we're all one unit? So learning that this is an interdependent relationship has been really meaningful to me. One of the ways I then think about this is that comes about speaking and listening. And so a real important lesson, and something I've had to learn, part of why I think I teach conflict resolution and communication in the first place, is that there's a tension between I need to learn how to speak up for myself, and I also need to learn how to listen. And these are skills that I can develop, and recognizing that, wow, my voice is important. But then also recognizing that that doesn't cancel out that your voice is important. And so learning to have both confidence and humility, ability to take in critiques and feedback and really listen to it and really think, wow, if someone's telling me this and it doesn't resonate, then maybe there's something to hear, is equally as important as recognizing that I have an important contribution to have into this situation. And that's something that's continuing to be a piece of growth. Another sort of dynamic tension that's been one to navigate is this tension between learning to forgive myself and others. Forgiveness is a total skill. And then also being able to be accountable and make amends and apologize when it's appropriate, and recognize that I might need to change, or recognizing that some things I do have impacts on other people. There's a great little puzzle here that if you want something to change, if you want another to change, you have to accept them exactly as they are. If I want myself to change, I first have to accept myself. If I want any part of my life to change, I have to be at peace with it, because there's something about being angry at something or resisting it, or I guess they say what we resist persists. There's a way that it seems like I want to hate something in my life, but actually I have to be able to realize that, okay, nope, that's happening. And then as soon as I can give it that acceptance, then there's a way that it can also then start to change. And this is true for other folks as well. And then another sort of interesting sort of dynamic paradox of personal growth for me, moving to become more of an omnipartial individual, is some things I can change. Some things I can grow and heal and take the effortful process of really trying to learn and grow. And there's many paths that one can take. I would say for me personally, there's been paths of meditation, or doing work as a min, or recognizing my privilege, recognizing what it means to be a US American, or whatever. Just there's ways that I need to grow. And then there's ways that I can't change. Maybe I just need to sort of accepting myself as I am. Then there's times where I just need to do harm reduction. Some cognitive biases and implicit biases are just there. They're just part of my life. And I need to just make sure that I can reduce the adverse impact of that kind of thing. I would say that another thing that's personally been really useful for me is to recognize that I don't have to do this alone. There's a lot of great things that I can do in community and in groups, and I could really highly recommend the Mankind Project for people who are interested in men's work. I think probably everyone should try to do some sort of 12-step program and figure out how to make amends for some of the harms they've made in their lives. So working in groups or in relationship, and that's where we get to learn the lessons and get the feedback. And then there's the integration. Integration is a really powerful part of when I learn a lesson, I have to really think about how am I going to actually apply this in my life. Those are all interesting dynamic tensions: self and other, my voice, your voice, confidence, humility, accountability, forgiveness, healing, acceptance, change, harm reduction. This is a very nuanced space that we're in, and none of this is easy. It's worth also recognizing that there's a lot of outside forces out there that would love to manipulate us on that. And so some of the things that I have learned to inoculate myself against manipulation, or to recognize my own personal reality, it's just capacity for thinking and critical thinking and sense making have been really powerful pieces. So I'm just going to name a couple of them. One, I find looking at a list of the cognitive biases, the sort of ways that we have a distorted way of understanding something, is really useful. And there's also the logical fallacies. There's a lot of different ways that people are sort of making arguments that once you learn what these logical fallacies are, you can sort of notice what's happening, and it makes it a lot easier to not be captured by other people's, opinions and ways that they might want to manipulate us and so forth. There's a lot of interesting things about just thinking like a scientist. I will share some stuff from The Story of Us by Tim Urban. And he has this whole section about thinking like a scientist. But the whole point is taking in a ton of information. Like I have a very diverse media diet and take in all these different perspectives. And then you take what I like and don't like, and just like bringing a lot in at the beginning, and then being very thoughtful about what I actually really believe. But the real piece is then taking my ideas, sharing them with people, and then listening to that feedback and being willing to correct myself, because really we're trying to come up with ways of understanding the world that are durable. And the only way we can know that is if we go out and ask people to give it a critique. That's been really powerful as well. There's another piece that I just want to talk about is even more, is about this place of acceptance. Compassion, self-compassion is powerful, and acceptance is powerful. And one of the things is acceptance allows change to happen. And it's also the best way that I can get someone else to change, is by being able to accept them. And I have someone just reflected to me recently that if I want the world to change, if I want our democracy to change, I first have to accept it as it is. And so that's my growing edge right now. But another piece why acceptance is so important is because being change and diversity and differences, accepting that and being open to it is not easy. It actually goes against our human nature. Humans were evolved in a tribal context. It's bands, clans, and that's our evolutionary thing. Fish swim in schools, and birds in flocks, bison in herds, and humans are in tribes. And recognizing that we are really only used to having a few hundred people that we can really trust in our life. And after that, all those strangers are a threat. And the reason why this is really important to recognize is because this democratic experiment that we're doing right now in creating a society with all sorts of differences and cultures and religions and perspectives and lived experiences, like that's a wild experiment, and it's paying. We really are creating this global, national, community level of difference. We're able to do so much cool stuff because we have all this diversity around us, but we are not built to do that. And that's why we have democratic systems and culture and processes that can help us do some of that. And so when I find myself struggling with something being hard, or I don't want to change, or I don't like this critique, remembering that that's okay. That's not how we're built. This is something that we're needing to do. We're choosing to do because it benefits all of us. It's really helpful for me. So a lot of the resources I also will be sharing going forward are about like why we're tribal and why we're afraid of change and why we protect our identity. Those are all things that I think are worth paying attention to. And that requires effort and support. That's why we can't do it alone. I want to just then just talk about how personal growth and development of the omnipartial individual is a key strategic theme for this, and how it relates to the other strategic themes. One is that when it comes to being able to have effective collaborative communication with other people, we need to actually want to do that. We need to be open and curious and be willing to make changes in ourselves and accept that we're part of the problem. And so all of these skills as individuals that we can do as individuals help us engage more effectively in collaborative communication and all the different processes. And yeah, if I might need to face that I messed up or that I have amends to make, if I'm not willing or able to do that, then that makes it harder. I think there's another piece here that is those of us or who are able to grow as individuals and actually face like really hard things with resilience and having done enough healing and so forth can allow us to engage with topics that are way too threatening and dangerous for certain people for various reasons of trauma or just exhaustion. Like, it's not easy to go and engage with people who are extremists or to give love to people who are causing serious harm. And so that personal fortitude becomes like a gift to that larger conversation. The other thing, the way this is interesting, is that our culture, which needs to evolve, and our systems, which need to evolve, it's really worth remembering that they are us. We are democracy. We are the United States, each of us. A way to think about this is, yeah, I can be frustrated with traffic, but if I'm a car in traffic, then I am traffic, and I have to see that I'm part of that. So I am this country. I am this history. I am this system. And so as individuals, we are the fundamental agents, the key units of these much bigger things. And so we influence those, and they influence us. There's a way that culture can act as a magnet. It can sort of help us grow up to the place where we need to be. But also, if we try to go beyond it, it's worth remembering that it's going to try to pull us back. And our systems also influence us. So we can just, whatever is the way we do something, and this is the way you do it, then we'll change as individuals. So we actually can easily adapt to the systems that change. And as individuals, we need to be the ones that demand that change. And I think that's something that's important to get to the place where we kind of stop tolerating divisiveness or manipulation and various things. And we need to stop tolerating being in a democracy where people with power have a disproportionate amount of influence. We can't be okay with that. And as individuals, we're the ones who are going to have to speak up about that. And so I definitely do not want to understate the power of any single individual to actually make some significant cultural or systemic change. So to wrap up here, this strategic theme is particularly complex. There's more content here than probably any of the other ones about self-help and growth, but you might not have ever heard of participatory democracy or deliberative dialogue. There's a lot of people who have a lot of opinions about this. It's super personal and idiosyncratic and all that, but it's still important because as an individual, this is the most valuable place for change. And to develop our resilience, to develop our acceptance of difference and acceptance of our own involvement in the situation, And when it comes to trying to make big change, it's the least effective way to do it. 100 millions of people are going to be hard to change each individual's mind. It'll be much easier to change our culture or our systems. But for each of us as individuals, I think this is a lot of great opportunities for learning. And I'm psyched to share all the different cool resources. Just to give you a sense of some of those where the resources are going to be going, there's understanding ourselves, who we are, and some of that is going to be we'll learn through biology and neurobiology and philosophy, and there's a lot of great thinking and learning that has been done over the years and millennia that can help us really understand the nature of what's happening. And so a lot of that will be helpful. There's also a whole bunch of stuff about how do we learn how to be resilient and accepting. And we'll talk about shadow work and mindfulness and healing, trauma healing, and all of those pieces are important. And then there's like learning about self-awareness and being like engaging in that growth. And some cool exercises on how do we like learn about our values and identify our values, and how do we grow as an individual, recognize the places where we need to grow. And some of that self-awareness then brings us more to our authentic self, and that allows us to then really become more effective voices for change in this world. And then there's just a lot of cool personal skills, communication skills, sense making and thinking. And so I'll be sharing those kinds of resources going forward. So as I said at the top, this is the fourth of the 4 strategic themes video series. Going forward from here, my plan is to continue following these 4 strategic themes and just starting to share all of these little bits of resources. So videos are going to be a bit shorter, and we'll start talking about the different elements of all these different things. And again, there's going to be a new podcast. It's coming this summer. I think the launch day is going to be July 4th. And I'll start talking to experts in all these different fields that are relevant to creating the Omni-win future. We have a website coming, and there'll be lots of great resources. But in the meantime, the best way for you to stay involved or stay tuned is to go to omniwin.substack.com. And that's where you'll get essays. Then at the bottom of all the essays, there's a video. So you can just, if you're a video person, just go to the video. And all sorts of different recommendations and quotes. And I'm gonna keep on giving you ideas and inspiration for going forward. So thank you. Thank you for being part of this. Thank you for watching, and thank you for your interest in co-creating the future of democracy.